Hello, I am Guy Louis Frechette. This video illustrates in detail and simplistic terms scientific principles that affect sexual orientation. Welcome to Sexual Orientation 102, Case Studies. Ellen, classically conditioned same-sex attraction, operantly conditioned, intolerant, and rigid. Ellen was the younger of two brothers. He would tag along when his older brother had sleepovers with his friends in the backyard. When they thought Ellen was asleep, they would get out their girly magazines and masturbate to the visual stimulus of the females in the pictures. But sometimes Ellen was pretending to sleep and he would watch the males masturbate. When Ellen was old enough to acquire his own porn, he found that gay porn was much more stimulating than straight porn. Ellen's same-sex erotic attraction was classically conditioned by the visual stimulus of gay porn and watching males masturbate. Ellen's operant conditioning by his Christian conservative family left him very low on the scale of sexual values. Thus, even though he had sexual relations with other males, he was not able to form any sort of intimate bond. Consequently, he became a loner, depressed, and often contemplated suicide. Ellen's options are limited. The GBLT community offer operant conditioning to raise his level of tolerance, but it would also mean abandoning his Christian faith. Christian intervention is useful for abstinence, but praying the gay away does not change classical conditioning. A professional therapist is not an option, as therapy to change erotic attraction is illegal in his state. Ellen believes he was born gay because he certainly would not choose a sexual orientation that left him so miserable and depressed. Bell experienced similar classical conditioning but different operant conditioning. Bell, classically conditioned same-sex attraction, operantly conditioned, tolerant, and rigid. Bell had an older sister who would occasionally bribe her to practice kissing. Kissing eventually led to fondling and other more sexual acts. During their sessions, the older sister was fantasizing about her latest boyfriend, but Bell was physically stimulated in a very feminine way, and same-sex attraction was classically conditioned. Bell's family and school were liberal, and her operant conditioning left her in the mid-range of sexual values. Bell joined the Gay-Straight Alliance in middle school and was having same-sex relations with intimate bonding by the time she was in high school. When she came out in the 11th grade, her family was very proud and threw her a huge coming-out party, as it was very fashionable and trendy to have such a modern daughter. Both Bell and her sister think that their sexual activities had nothing to do with sexual orientation, as one turned out straight and the other gay. Both believe Bell was born gay. Cindy, classically conditioned opposite sex attraction, operantly conditioned, tolerant and rigid, moves to tolerant and fluid. Cindy was an average normal teenager who never gave much thought to homosexuality. Her classical conditioning was uneventful, establishing a typical female-to-male erotic attraction. Cindy's operant conditioning was also uneventful. Her family were occasional Christians who attended a liberal church, and she was in the mid-range of sexual values. When Cindy was a senior, she discovered that her younger brother was being teased for possibly being gay. Cindy had always been protective of her little brother. She joined the Gay-Straight Alliance and became an advocate for gay rights, anti-bullying, and tolerance. When Cindy went to college, she minored in queer studies. She learned about more fluidic forms of sexuality and came to believe that gender and sex are both irrelevant to love. What she was experiencing was operant conditioning that raised her into the upper range of sexual values. Cindy began to experiment and established a same-sex relation, complete with intimate bonding, that lasted nearly 2 years. Eventually, Cindy settled down with a male, but she is very insistent that she is pansexual. Cindy believes nobody is born with a sexual orientation and that she is living proof that everyone can love whomever they choose. Davis, classically conditioned opposite sex and same-sex attraction. Operantly conditioned, tolerant and rigid moves to tolerant and fluid. Davis had an older sister who paid him to be her waiter when she had her girlfriends over to sunbathe around their backyard pool. He kept the scantily clad girls supplied in soft drinks, lotions, towels, etc. Occasionally, Davis was also required to apply lotion to hard-to-reach places. His classical conditioning was definitely male-to-female erotic attraction. Davis was heavy-set, non-athletic, and not very skilled at talking to the opposite sex. Consequently, despite his best efforts, he graduated high school without ever having a girlfriend. In college, Davis was still seeking sexual adventures with females without success. During that time, he made friends with other males, many of which had similar interests like film, politics, and social justice. Some of his new friends were gay and offered to help him out in the sexual area. At first, Davis declined as his operant conditioning had left him in the mid-range of sexual values. But after several months of liberal classes and social bonding with his gay friends, his operant conditioning raised his sexual values into a higher range. At first, Davis only allowed his friends to pleasure him, but eventually he became a full participant. Davis remained an active member of the gay community through college, graduate school, and into the first few years of his profession. He eventually met and married the girl of his dreams. On his wedding day, he proudly proclaimed he was a heterosexual virgin. Davis came to believe that everyone is bisexual. He doesn't think anybody is born gay or straight. It's all situational. Until this point, all references to conditioning have been positive. Elsa and Fred experience aversive conditioning. Aversive conditioning happens when negative emotions like fear, anxiety, and repulsion become conditioned emotional responses. Elsa, classically conditioned opposite sex attraction and repulsion. Operantly conditioned intolerant and rigid moves to tolerant and rigid. Classically conditioned same-sex attraction. Elsa was sexually abused by a male friend of the family as she was going through puberty. Like many child molesters, he would pleasure her to fulfill his delusion that she loved him. Elsa's physical sexual stimulus was masculine, which classically conditioned opposite sex erotic attraction, but it also conditioned the emotional response of despisement and repulsion, which effectively blocked heterosexual bonding. When Elsa got out on her own, she would date males, but only those with no chance of intimate attachment. Consequently, she had a string of low-quality boyfriends and turned to drugs and alcohol to escape her emotional void. Elsa eventually ended up in treatment. Through the course of therapy, her operant conditioning raised her sexual values. Elsa formed an intimate bond with another female even before she began to experiment sexually. She closed the void and felt loved for the first time. Elsa believes she was born gay, as that would explain her newfound feelings, and, she believes, it also explains why she was victimized as a child. Fred, classically conditioned opposite sex attraction with anxiety and insecurity. Operantly conditioned intolerant and rigid. Classically conditioned same-sex attraction. Fred was the only child of a single mother who was overprotective and severely limited his social interactions. When Fred attempted to establish any outside relationship, his mother would emotionally withdraw, leaving Fred insecure and anxious. Thus, any attempt to form intimate bonds, particularly with girls, also resulted in a conditioned emotional response of insecurity and abandonment. Eventually, girls became a stimulus for anxiety, insecurity, and emotional abandonment. Fred came to despise and hate females. When Fred turned to other males for sex, he found he was not able to form emotional bonds with them either. But he was able to find gay friends who shared a mutual despisement of females. In summary, we have seen that sexual orientation is not inflexible, rather it is the result of scientific principles in action. If you have questions, do some research. I recommend you start with Google Scholar and read the actual studies. If you would like to discuss, promote, or follow, I am easy to find. This is a GLF production, no rights reserved, which means it can be passed around freely and used for educational purposes.